through the means of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation that is around us. In the verses recited in the first rakat of Maghrib Salah, Inna fi khalqis samawat. Now amazingly, these are verses that our beloved Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam teaches us a great lesson, that on awakening in the early part of the morning for tahajjud salah, when there is total serenity and peace, the Mubarak habit of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that time, as soon as awakening, was to look towards the sky and recite these very verses, the last ruku of Surah Ali Imran. And essentially, what does Allah Ta'ala say in the beginning of these verses? That verily, in the creation of the skies and the earth, and the turning of night and day succeeding one another, in it are many, many signs for those of intellect, for people of deep understanding of intellect. Alladina, and who are those people who are the intelligent ones? The Quran's definition of the intelligent ones, those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while standing, while sitting, while lying down, and deeply ponder and reflect upon the creation of the skies, the earth, upon nature, upon the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they reach the conclusion that, oh Allah, most definitely you have not created this in vain or without any purpose. It is created for a massive purpose. And oh Allah, you are the one who is pure, who has created all of this. You save us from the punishment of the fire of Jahannam. For indeed the one whom you enter into Jahannam, that is degradation in the true sense of the word. That is the lowest form of embarrassment. May Allah Ta'ala protect us from that. And so we find the Quran Kareem is replete with verses wherein Allah Ta'ala talks about His greatness. Many, many verses talking about His greatness by making mention of the amazing means in which Allah Ta'ala has created things. A few nights ago, alhamdulillah, in the field of zoology, we have heard Mufti Rahimullah talking about the signs of the greatness of Allah Ta'ala in the creation of animals. And we are very fortunate to have great joy and happiness, really from the bottom of my heart, of having in our presence a very, very old, a childhood colleague of ours, Hafiz Abdul Salam Karan. Very brief introduction. And Hafiz would not like me mentioning these things, but just so that we understand the background to the personality who will be speaking to us. He reigns from a family of nobility. His father was the late, great Hazrat Maulana Yusuf Karan Sahib, rahimahullah ta'ala, who had done sterling service in the Cape area, serving in the MJC, as well as translating many, many valuable books, the various books of Fadail, Fadail Amal, Fadail Sadaqat, Fadail of Durood Sharif. He had a great hand in translating many of those books himself, has studied under the auspice of great people himself. This is Maulana Yusuf Karan Sahib. From Maulana's maternal connections, his mother is from the family, the sister of the late Maulana Ibrahim Adam Sahib, so a family of ulama, and then had the great honor from a very young age to have done hifz. And this is where we had the opportunity of interaction, having done hifz at the hands of one of the great hifz ustads of our country, Hazrat Hafiz Rahman, rahimahullah ta'ala. Hafiz spent many years in his guidance, doing his hifz and being guided. And also, if we have to say that in our times, amongst two of the greatest hifz ustads in our country in, let's call it the last 50 years, Hafiz Rahman Sahib, rahimahullah ta'ala, and in the Cape area, Sheikh Saleh Abadi. Sheikh Hafiz also had the honor of, after returning back to Cape Town, of continuing his dawah and revision under the auspices of Sheikh Saleh Abadi. Hafiz has acquired a PhD in agricultural sciences. He's the Dean of the Faculty at Stellenbosch University in this field. Also serves on the Planning Commission, one of the commissioners in the Planning Commission in the Presidency. So it gives us great joy and happiness, inshallah, to call upon Hafiz Abdul Salam Karan. His brother is the famous Maulana Taha Karan, who now and again graces us with his advices as well. We call upon Hafiz Sahib, inshallah, to lend us his advices, his insight, especially into the scientific research. Important here is that it enhances the Quran. It is emphatic. As we have heard the other night, not a single principle set down in the Quran has ever been disproven by science. Yes, conversely, many a times the Quran has stated a principle that at the time science did not understand, but over centuries had to come to admission the truthfulness of what has been said in the Quran Kareem. So it is a means of enhancing the recognition of the greatness of Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala accept from us, inshallah, and reward Hafiz Sahib. He has actually altered his travel arrangements to honor. A few nights ago, Hafiz was supposed to be with us due to a family janazah. May Allah have mercy on the marhuma. Was unable, but had the nobility and the honor in his nature to honor this invitation. We say Jazakumullah khairan and request Hafiz Salam, inshallah, to address us.
اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سبيلا اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وأصحابه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. Respected ulama, respected elders, brothers in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm a little bit emotional when Maulana talks about our childhood and talks about my father and our teachers, our Maulsab, Hafizullah Rahman, and Sheikh Salih Abadi, whom we had the great honor of learning from them. But when Maulana read إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, I went back to my childhood of listening to my father many times. This was his favorite to read. And I had memorized إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ from just listening to him. And as a child, I used to mimic him and try to read like him because he read it with a very special emotion. Like he was not only reciting the Quran, but like he was giving me a message. And many times people will ask me, why did you study agriculture? Why do you have this interest in nature? And if you must put it down to one factor, it is the inspiration and the effect, beyond logic, the effect of listening to my father read إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And many times he would have said to me, it doesn't matter how clever you are in school or at university or anything. What is inside your chest is much greater than anything you can learn in any book. And I remember as a youngster, I think I was 10 years old or so, my father one day returned from Mia's farm, and Maulana said a few things about me, so I can say a few things about Maulana. He returned from Mia's farm and said to myself and my brother, pack your bags. You're going to Mia's farm. And in those days you say, but what did I do wrong, Because you're naughty, you go to Mia's farm. He said, no, you fellows are so old, you're 10 years old, 11 years old. I've come from Mia's farm and I saw a boy who is not yet at school and he's Hafid al-Quran. So pack your bags, you better go. If a boy of that age can beat you, you better go and learn the Quran. And we grew up in the Cape. The Cape is a beautiful place. It's a nice place for holiday. There are many beautiful things in the Cape and distractions and so on. You don't want to leave your home. And he put us on a train and said, go. And I thought, I want to find this fellow who's 5 years old who caused me to come to Mia's farm to leave this beautiful Cape. And I thought, I'll bully him. And I came there. But before that, my father said to us, you must learn your Quran. And I mentioned these things as encouragement to parents, as encouragement to students about how to guide our children. My father said, you must learn your Quran and you must get your ilm not just from an alim. You must get it from a pious person. And he said to us, there are two people at that stage, this is now early 80s, there are two people in this country whose piety I have great regard for. And he says, in the Cape, it's Sheikh Salih, and he took us there. And he said to Sheikh, can you teach these two useless fellows? And Sheikh said, I'm too old now, I can't keep children at home anymore, my wife is too weak, I'll teach them the Fatiha. And then they must go. And then my father said, then there's no two ways about it, you have to go to Mia's farm. And we got there, and when we started learning, I quickly realized, man, I'm homesick. I want to go back to the Cape. Left this beautiful Cape behind. So I went to my Ustad and I said to him, Mulsab, is there a way I can learn faster so I can go home quicker? He said, yes, there is one way. And that's the second trouble Mullah Burhan calls me. He says, every Saturday, after class, we stop class about 11 o'clock, Mulsab. After class, from 11 o'clock till Zohar, you will stand with Maulana Burhan for the rest of your time on Mias Farm and learn extra. And I don't know how many years we stood next to each other. We used to call it spun. So me and Maulana used to spun. And then I said, the same fellow is causing me more trouble. Because now every Saturday when everybody is playing soccer and football and cricket on the field, I have to stand with Maulana Burhan and learn the Quran. But from that, Allah Ta'ala has put great muhabbat between us and great reverence for the esteemed teachers that we have. We make dua that Allah Ta'ala gives that every parent, that every child can spend their lives emulating their parents and emulating their teachers. We come well short of that. But if we emulate them till today, I try to read Inna fi khalqi samawati wal ard like my father read it. I despise the many asatida who have the wonderful privilege of sitting in a class and listening to students read the Quran. I wish I could give up everything and just do that job. And because I would feel that I'm emulating my Ustad. But be that as it may, Maulana has asked that I talk to you about the wonders of nature. I am not capable of teaching you anything. I'm weaker than all of you. Allah Ta'ala has given me the privilege of studying science, of learning the Quran, but I'm not sufficiently capable to interpret it to its true value. But let me try. I don't want to disappoint Maulana. And it's an honor for me to be standing here in front of you and talk about this. I spend a lot of time advising the presidency on the Planning Commission about how to plan the future of the country. And each time you have to give advice. This is something my father also said to me shortly before he passed away. He said, whenever you give advice or you have to make a decision, never do it by yourself. Consult an alim and a pious person. What he told me when I was 10 years old, he told me when I was almost 50 years old. He says, consult an alim, and he gave me a few names. See, these are the people that you must ask for advice. Now, when we do give advice, I understand, and I thought, what must I talk about tonight? Uppermost in my mind is this is the year 2016. And in the history of this country, we will remember this year 2016 as the driest year ever in the history, or since the statistics became available 104 years ago. So in the last 104 years, 2016 has been the driest and the warmest. I'll give you one example. I often advise farmers. They sometimes think it's funny when I get there, they think I'm coming to sell them something. But coming to give advice, if you get good advice, then there is respect. So one big farmer here in Berkeley West, it's a farm called Wilde Klaver. You will know the name. He's the biggest onion farmer. He says to me, you must come and see my onions, there's a problem. So what he says, 4 times I planted, we went to look at his beetroot. Now I'm talking about vegetables because I want to entice you to also be vegetable farmers. Every Muslim must have a little garden where you put your fingers in the soil and feel the power that is there. Anyway, so this farmer says, look at this beetroot of mine. 4 times I planted it. The first time I planted it, I gave it water once a day. It didn't grow. It just germinated and came up and the seedlings died. And I knew it was dry. So the second time I planted it, I gave it water twice a day. The seedlings came up and I had a 20% crop. I took it out. I planted it. This is the best onion farmer in the country that I know. He says, the third time I planted it, 30% yield. I watered it 5 times a day. Still I didn't get a yield. And then I say, the 4th time I planted it, I watered it 7 times a day. And I got a 30% yield. You say, what is this? Now I remember another ustad of mine, of ours, Mullah Abdullah Patel used to say, one day, this is years ago, he said, when I left for university, he said, one day you will go to the country and you will tell them, قَالَ جَعَلْنِي عَلَى خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ إِنِّي حَفِيظٌ عَلِيمٌ. Malana must give the translation. So I went to President Zuma and said, I'm not corrupt and I have expertise in the field. I was hoping he would say the same to me. And said, Mr. President, you have a problem. This is the warmest and the driest year in the history. We are facing what Egypt faced, as the Quran explained to us. And that means that this winter that is ahead of us, that will start imminently, there will not be enough food in this country for the people. He says, how do you know that? He said, well, if you study nature, you will find out that the cycles in nature gives effect to the cycles in society, to the cycles in an economy. A simple example. For those of you who like to hunt or like to go to a game park, springbuck, they know when it's going to rain well before human beings know that it's going to rain. You can see it in their noses, in their ears, in their eyes. They know something is going to happen because they can read the signs in nature. They read what the grasses do. They listen to the soil. They listen to the small animals. They listen to the wind. Then they know something is going to happen. So if you study the cycles in nature, you will see something is coming. Yusuf alayhi salam had to interpret a dream that said something is coming. So he said, when we come to this winter, there will not be enough food. Of course, I saw this farmer and I saw how his crop was down, 30% crop only. And I knew there's a problem here. So the same for maize. The effect is, without going into the details, our country will have to import 1.2 million tons of maize to be able to survive from now till October. Now, we consume 11 million tons. So we are short by 1 million tons of just maize. And our food prices are increasing. You'll know, those of you who do your own shopping, will know that food price inflation at this moment is in excess of 30%. And it's still increasing for basic foodstuffs. So the poor will not be able to eat. And I'm worried about this. Because when the poor cannot eat, and winter comes and their energy requirements are high, and they have to eat, what will they do? They will go to the streets. Society will become unstable. They will plunder. They will rob. They will take. And this is what our country faces. So what's happening in the political domain, and what's happening with service delivery protests, and the poor being agitated, and what we're seeing on campuses everywhere, it starts with nature that said, I'm going to pull this water away from you. I'm not going to give you water. I'm going to increase your temperature. Almost as a form of, firstly, a warning, but it could be punishment. But since we know it in advance, we can do certain things. And this is what I'm spending most of my last few months on in the presidency, to advise how do we deal with this situation. But what it made me think of deeply, because the Quran tells us we have to think about وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ. We have to think deeply about the creation of Allah Ta'ala. Now, the key thing is Allah Ta'ala had taken away a large portion of the water. So now you have to study what is water. If you want to understand nature, it starts with understanding water. And my first purpose in this talk is to encourage a respect and an appreciation of water. So let me go into it. Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. H2O, most of us know. Now you can imagine, if this fist of mine is hydrogen, and this fist is hydrogen, and my head is oxygen, and they are bounded by my two arms, that is what you call a molecule of water. An atom of hydrogen, and two atoms of hydrogen linked to an atom of oxygen makes a molecule of water. Now the question is, how does that two hydrogens bond to oxygen? Now the children who do chemistry, and those of us who studied a bit of science will know, it's a certain bond that forms. But for those two things to come together is highly unlikely. Oxygen is very scarce. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the entire universe. You'll find hydrogen here, you'll find it in Jupiter, you'll find it on the moon, everywhere else. Oxygen you won't find anywhere. So these two things must come together. For them to come together, they have to bond. Now, if my fist is the hydrogen atom, around this hydrogen, in the middle of it is a nucleus made up of protons. Around it are electrons that swing around it in an orbit, an elliptical orbit, constantly. And when these two, oxygen and hydrogen, come together, these two bubbles of electrons will merge into one. And that makes the molecule. The question that is difficult to answer is, how is it possible for these two things to come together if it's so unlikely? Because for them to merge requires a form of energy extraneously. From the outside, energy has to be inserted so that these two things can come together. And that is how creation starts. See, because the difference between Earth and all the other planets, because they haven't discovered water, is that we have water here. And Maulana was reading the ayah in the second rakat, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. Now from water, every living thing was created. We have given life to everything through water. So life through water. No water, no life. So on earth, when Allah Ta'ala wanted to create life on earth, He created water. And He created these, said to hydrogen and oxygen come together, and inserted an energy into it. And that energy comes from the atmosphere. But that energy is instructed. It has purpose. Allah Ta'ala created this water with purpose so that there can be life. Now the scientists say that the first life was created deep in the ocean, where there's almost no light. Now, right at the bottom, in the deepest part of the ocean, when you go down for kilometers, there are things called vesicles, which are holes, pores in the bottom of the ocean, through which energy, in particular heat, is exerted into the ocean from the core of the earth at a temperature of 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it will destroy anything. But at that temperature, there are certain plants, certain animals, certain organisms that can live there. And that's the first part of life that's created under those very high temperatures. So from water comes life. So Allah created this water. And then, when there's one water molecule, then they bond to each other. More and more water molecules. And after a few million, you get a droplet of water. Now, in that droplet of water, Allah Ta'ala has placed certain properties. And it's the properties that we tend to forget. You know, I often have to fight with the scientists, the water scientists, who take, for a country like ours, we run like the British system on waterborne sanitation. So when we excrete, we use water to wash it away, and it cleanses it. But what they then do, in the sewage plants, at night when we sleep, they release all that sewage in the rivers to flow towards the ocean. And it contaminates the river. Show me one river in our country where you can go and drink the water from your hands. You can't. It has been contaminated everywhere because of the disrespect we have for water. Now, water has certain properties. And I'll mention just a few to show what great substance Allah Ta'ala has created for us. And He's taken it away from us. One property of water is, I was talking to Maulana this afternoon, it came to me. You know, the oceans, every day the sun shines and exerts heat on the earth. What happens to that heat? A little bit goes into the tar, a little bit into the plants, a little bit into our bodies. But you know, half an hour after the sun sets, everybody is cold again. What actually happens during the day, the ocean absorbs most of that heat. Most of it. Absorbed in the ocean, and it is kept there. When night falls, whatever the temperature is, if you don't increase the temperature, we will freeze to death. Because the atmosphere out there is so cold, in a few seconds we will die. But the warmth that is in the ocean at night is released like a thermostat, like an air condition. It is released back into the atmosphere, and it keeps the atmosphere just good enough so we can go and have a sleep. And the next day the same thing happens every day. And Allah Ta'ala has put that property in water to absorb that heat, to hold it for a certain time, and to release it when we need it. Another property of water is water can heal. We know that. I remember when we completed Khatam al-Quran, Maulsab used to have a bucket and pass it around, and we all had to blow into the bucket. When we make dhikrullah, when we read Quran, our parents, our elders taught us, blow into the water. Because why? Water has memory. If you put something into water, any substance, that will change the property of that water. Let's say, for instance, you put medicine into that water. It doesn't matter how many times you dilute the water, millions of times, it never loses the property of that infusion. It doesn't. So when you read Quran on water, that property will stay in that water forever. It gets caught up because water has a memory. If you want to read about this, there's an interesting Japanese scientist called Emoto, Masaru Emoto. He writes a book called Hidden Messages in Water. What this man has done, he takes water and then he puts something pleasant next to it. Let's say a nice fragrance next to the water. Then he freezes that water. Then he takes that frozen water, puts it under the microscope, and he looks at it. And you see beautiful crystals have formed, like a flower. In his research, he'd even taken the Quran. Someone reads the Quran next to the water. He takes that water, he freezes it, and it makes a beautiful crystal. Beauty, like a wedding ring, that kind of crystal. And he would play, let's say, a bird that chirps next to the water and make a crystal. He freezes it, takes that frozen thing, puts it under a microscope and look at it, and you see a different crystal. So water reacts to emotion. And water has a memory, and water can recognize certain things. So that refreshing feeling that you feel when you put water to your face or when you make wudu, it's more than just a temperature change. It is water reacting to the energy in your body. And it knows what to do. How is it possible? I'm sure there are some medical people here who can explain this better. How is it possible that when you have a wound, anyway, and that wound swells, what is that swelling? That swelling is a rushing of blood to that area. What is blood other than water with some substance in it? So water knows, it has the intelligence to know there's a part of the body that is hurt. I better go there so I can take some nutrition there. Because we didn't think in our mind and said to our body, hey, take some water to my ankle, it is swollen. No, the water knows. So Allah created this great property in water to have the intelligence to know where it is needed. It's a little similar to honey. The Quran also tells us about bees and honey. In Surah Nahl, 14th para, tells us about honey. Honey has that same property. That's why it has such high status. When you eat honey, remember honey gets made in the belly of the bee, like it is explained in the Quran. Now, when honey gets into your stomach, it is the only substance that does not have to be digested because it's already digested in the stomach of the bee. It goes straight into your bloodstream. And that honey knows which part of your body it must go to solve a problem. Where does that intelligence come from? That is the intelligence in nature. Another property of water is magnetism. They did some research that shows when you keep water in very thin tubes, like a vein, it changes its properties, as opposed to when you keep it in a big water body. And for that reason, you'll find, let's say, a high blue gum tree of 30, 40 meters high. If you, let's say under normal circumstances, build a little tube, doesn't matter how you support it, and you build it 40 meters high, and you fill it with a column of water, that column will collapse because it's too heavy. But in a plant, it doesn't happen. How is it that in that very thin tube of water, it does not collapse? Because Allah Ta'ala put that property in water. When you put it in a thin tube, it changes. It becomes magnetic. And by magnetic, it means it clings to everything around it, like a spider almost. So it can't go down, it can't go up, it stays where it is. And it then moves, not only itself, but the nutrition in it moves to the point, it moves the nutrition to the point that it wants it to be. That is the intelligence of water. Another interesting thing about water, did you notice when you put something in your fridge to freeze it in the freezer? Let's say you put a bottle of cool drink in the freezer. Just check next time. When you freeze cool drink, it freezes from the bottom up and from inside to outside. When you freeze water, it freezes from the top down, not from the bottom up. In other words, it's a different substance. Now there's a purpose why Allah Ta'ala made water freeze from the top down and not from the bottom up. And the reason is a very important one. Allah Ta'ala had created the earth and put snow caps on the poles. And those snow caps is where most of our water is conserved. Then He creates the sun and says to the sun, melt these snow caps at a particular rate so that there is enough rainfall precipitation across the earth, and it's worked out to precision. What's that ayat, Musaf, about precision? Everything in measure? إِنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ وَمَا أَمْرُنَا إِلَّا وَاحِدَةٌ كَلَمْحٍ بِالْبَصَرِ. Surah Qamar, just before Rahman. I'll come back to this issue. But these two snow caps, when they melt, where does the iceberg hang? Not at the bottom of the ocean. It has to float above. And there's a reason why it has to float above. Because when it floats above the water, and it melts, as the sun melts the iceberg, that melting of water causes the currents of the ocean. And if it doesn't melt, and there's no water flow, the ocean will stand still. And water that doesn't move goes rotten. So Allah Ta'ala said, this water, the ice, it better freeze from the top and not from the bottom. It is created with purpose. The other interesting thing is when water freezes, it freezes from 4 degrees. When it comes to 4 degrees, something else happens to it. When it freezes, it starts to expand. It becomes bigger. When you freeze ice in the freezer, you fill it to this level, you see it's full. Because water expands. In fact, it will break the bottle out of freezing. So why does it expand? Because Allah Ta'ala wants to give us more just from that same droplet. So He makes it freeze and He expands it. So I'm explaining to these scientists who tell us, well, there's no water in South Africa, so we need to make a plan. Say, what plan is that? I could say to them, we have to make istighfar. We are doing something wrong. But I'm not sure they'll understand me. So I'm saying, no, maybe we must study the properties of water. And water has 4 properties, 4 conditions. 1, liquid, that we know. 2nd is vapor, that we know. 3rd one is solid, ice, that we know. But there's a 4th property of water. A whole body of research in science about the 4th property of water. What is that property? Everything I described to you now, all these various properties, the intelligence of water, is called the 4th property, and they call it liquid crystalline. They give a nice term to it. I think the Quranic term is ma'am tahura. وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا. Now what is ma'am tahura? When water falls from the sky, this is another property Allah Ta'ala had given it. As it precipitates, droplet by droplet, it falls from the sky. It's not just water. It picks up nutrition in the air. It picks up nitrogen. It bonds to the nitrogen that is free hanging in the air. It bonds to that nitrogen, and when it falls to the earth with that nitrogen, it deposits the nitrogen in the earth as feed for the plant. Now, what happens? That water falls on the earth. And the Quran teaches us this. Now, I do this deliberately because I remember the words of my father. Whatever you learn in these science books is not close to what is in your chest. And I promise you I've read a lot of science books. I have 180 professors in my faculty who report to me on all their research, and I have to read all those things. And I know what they do. And each time, after reading a whole body of research on water, I come back to one small ayah in the Quran that explains everything. And sometimes I wonder, why did I bother? I should have just sat in the class, listened to the students, and I would have had the same barakah. But Allah Ta'ala uses us, when we ask that Allah Ta'ala use us for His purpose, that He guides us and makes us a form of guidance to others. So, when this drop of water falls to... Mullah, how's my time? When this drop of water... Now imagine, here it comes and it splashes on the earth. And the Quran begins to teach us again. وترى الأرض هامدة فإذا أنزلنا عليها الماء اهتزت وربت وأنبتت من كل زوج بهيج. Maulana was reading it. Maulana, you have to translate this.
Swelling effect. It shakes into life, it has a blowing up effect or swelling into life. And thereafter it causes the growth, it grows many, many different things in different forms, different colors, vegetation then grows from the earth.
So whatever I've learned about soil science and about hydrology and about pedology and about geophysics and about irrigation engineering, all of that is captured in this one ayah of Quran. So I'll explain it to you. So the droplet falls to the earth. Allah Ta'ala sent His barakah. Now the earth is dry. فَتُصْبِحُ الْأَرْضُ مُخْضَرَّةً. The earth is dry and the water is now going to sink into the earth. What then happens, when Maulana said, ihtazzat, it's like a quivering, what's up? It's a quiver. The earth, it shakes, like you're shaking a branch, right? So what happens? When that water enters the earth, at whichever place, the earth begins to shake. There are some people who have the ability to hear it, but you have to be a special person. When the earth shivers, now what shivering is that? Why does it shiver? The scientists did an experiment, and the teachers, even the school teachers, I think, still do this experiment. If you take, let's say, a 2-liter bottle, and you make a small hole at the bottom, so the water drips out. You take 2 little pipes, and you make them go in different directions. And that water drips through those pipes. You put 2 metal rings, and the dripping of the water goes through those metal rings. Metal is magnetic, so there will be some magnetic effect, charging of the water droplet. And it drops into 2 holders, 2 cups at the bottom. And you connect those 2 cups with 2 electric wires. Each time there's a drop, there's a spark. Each time there's a drop, there's a spark. What is that? That is ihtazzat. Because when that water goes into the earth, like they would say, the sparks are flying. Because suddenly the earth is saying, I've been waiting for this water. The water is positively charged because of the way it came down. The earth is in tension, it's negatively charged, and this positive and negative connects, and the earth shivers. It's an electromagnetic effect in the earth. And the Quran just says ihtazzat. I can give you many textbooks that explains ihtazzat in detail. And the Quran gives it to us in one word. Then the Quran says warabat. It swells. So how does it swell? So that water goes, let's say there's a grain of sand, the water goes and coats the grain of sand. When it coats that grain of sand, it sticks to it. Remember what I said about water in small tubes? It becomes magnetic and it clings. So that water clings to that grain of sand. It could have flown through, but it doesn't. It clings to this grain of sand because Allah Ta'ala had intended for it to coat that grain of sand. So this grain of sand is now, firstly, it's got a shock. Secondly, it now has water around it. So something must happen. Now you can imagine the electricity in the earth. So it coats that grain of sand. When it coats that grain of sand, on the surface of that sand, there are many, many minerals, beneficial minerals, because when sand lies idle, they say it mineralizes. Mineralizes mean they break the carbon bonds and minerals come free, and it sits like dust on the outer of the sand grain. Now, when that happens, it forms what we call a colloid. In other words, water with minerals inside it. It's like a juice. Now, the juice is there, and it's sticking to the sand, and then, because the water is there, now you need space, so the sand begins to swell, because there's water inside. Like your stomach swells when you drink too much water, or when you eat. Similarly there, the soil begins to swell. Warabat. The third phase, ambatat, is it grows. Now explain وأنبتت من كل زوج بهيج. وأنبتت. Now the water is there. There's electricity. There's excitement, right? It's excited. Similarly, like when they shock your heart, you go and you begin to die, and they shock you, and suddenly something happens, and everything begins to work again. So the earth is shocked. The nutrition is in a colloidal form. Now something has to happen to it. So it goes, and water knows, I'm now looking for a seed. Now, in 1 square meter of soil, let's say half this musalla, there are billions and billions of seeds. Not 10, 20, 50. There are billions and billions of seeds. We can't see them. So this water goes to the seed. It says to the seed, knock, knock, I want to come inside. The seed says, I'm sleeping, leave me alone. And that seed could have been there for a few 100 years. I'm not interested. He goes to the next seed, he says, knock, knock, can I come inside, please? I'm telling this so that children can tell their friends the story of knock, knock on the seed's door. He goes to the next seed, and that seed says, I've been waiting for you. How does he know? Because in that seed, the pH inside the seed, the pH is the level of acidity measured on 1 to 14. 1 is very acidic, and 14 is alkaline. So depending on the pH inside the seed, and depending on the other conditions where I want to explain now, inside the seed says, please come inside. And the water permeates the seed. It can't get into other seeds. Allah Ta'ala decided at which condition must each seed be penetrated. Well, now what's that ayah about the seed? No, the other one that says, even if there's a grain of seed somewhere in a crevice. Yeah. Yes. Allah has the knowledge that each seed, He knows which seed must now germinate. So the water condition, the condition of the seed is the same, and the seed penetrates. The water penetrates. And the water penetrates, remember, with its nutrition into that seed. Now it's inside the seed, just enough, and the seed is soaked with water. So the seed is now has woken up. Firstly, it's got a bit of electricity. Secondly, it's got food. And there's a chemical reaction inside the seed. The reaction is usually, without going into the details of it, the seed begins to say, I've got to grow. To grow, I need food. I've got some food in this water, and I've got some food that my parent plant, my mother, left inside of me, a little bit of fat that I can use. So it uses that, uses what's in the water, and begins meiosis, which is cell division. So in most seeds you have one cell, some seeds have more, but it now says I've got to grow, so it's got to divide itself into different cells. And you can see the division is like little circles on top of each other. So it begins to divide, and it grows with the little food it has. But the seed knows, I have a problem. I'm going to run out of food very soon. He knows it's just enough for a certain amount of cell division. So I've got to get outside. There's more food outside. And then in one moment, when the seed swells, and it says, I have to break out, it sends out one small leaf. It is so small and so meek that if I rub it between my fingers, it's nothing. And that leaf comes to the top of the seed and says, I've got to get out of here. There's no food. And it breaks through the shell of the seed at the power of, let's say, when you pump your car's tire, you go 2 bars. When you pump it 100 times 2 bars, with that power, it bursts through the shell. That small seed that you can hardly see with your eye, it bursts through the cell, cracks it open, sends out this one leaf to say, go and get some sunlight, and it sends out another one at the bottom, says, go and fetch some food. That is the root, and the plant grows from there. وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ هَامِدَةً فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ اهْتَزَّتْ وَرَبَتْ وَأَنبَتَتْ مِنْ كُلِّ زَوْجٍ بَهِيجٍ. إِنَّ اللَّهَ فَعَلَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Was it the Adhan, Mala? No. So I will maybe begin to end off by saying that Allah Ta'ala created the earth with purpose. Allah Ta'ala had put water to create life on earth with a purpose. At the end of time, Allah Ta'ala will destroy all of it because He can. When He created that first molecule of water, we just read that ayah also. وَمَا أَمْرُنَا إِلَّا وَاحِدَةٌ كَلَمْحٍ بِالْبَصَرِ. That
doesn't require, it's just like the blink of an eye.
In a blink of an eye. In a blink of an eye. Now that water molecule that Allah Ta'ala created, that first one, when Allah Ta'ala created that water, was a split of a second. And water had grown from there. Now there's water on the earth. By the same energy, Allah Ta'ala put the energy in. Now you can prove it through a chemical equation. If you take that energy out, the bond will split. Hydrogen and oxygen will go in different directions, and there's no more water. And it will happen. It has to happen. Every reaction has a certain reaction. Every matter has an antimatter. And that will be the end of the world. Where Allah Ta'ala will take away the energy from water. Everything will collapse and life will come to an end. كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ. As the Quran warns us. So how will it happen? It will happen through water.
A car needs to be moved. Red GTI WVM. Red GTI WVM. Can you please move the car?
So at the end of time, all these things will collapse in a twinkle of an eye. Allah Ta'ala will take that energy away. Water will split up. It won't exist. We cannot exist without water. And it can all come to an end. How? When you look at the surface of the earth, 72% of the surface of the earth is water. But the earth is round, but where the water is, there are indents. So the water will lie there like in a big dam. But if you made this circle perfectly round, perfectly diametrical or elliptical, perfectly round, and you push the water out of the ocean, the water will cover the surface of the earth to a level of 2.5 kilometers above the surface of the earth. The entire earth will be flooded with water by 2.5 kilometers deep. I don't know who will be able to swim when that happens. And it will happen. Maulana was asking me this, was telling me that the hadith says the moon will fall into the ocean. Now remember I told you that the water absorbs energy. It absorbs heat and it gives it off in the night. What happens when Allah Ta'ala says to that water, don't give off the temperature, keep it. and it keeps it, and it keeps it, and it absorbs it, which is happening because water temperature is increasing. The ice is melting faster and faster. Every year the water temperature moves a little. So the trend is that this water will heat up to such an extent. And what happens when water heats? It expands. And it can overflow the entire earth. It can flood the entire earth, for that matter. And when that water becomes, remember when I said water is magnetic? And it has to get rid of this temperature. Where can it get rid? It can't put it back into the earth because it's even warmer there. I said it's 5,000 degrees Celsius. Can't take it there. Where will it take the heat to? It will have to exchange heat with the closest body in the heaven. And what is the closest body to us? It's the moon. So it will magnetically pull the moon into the water. And it will begin to collapse. And I don't have enough knowledge to explain how that process will go on. But in the Quran it is explained in detail. Maybe Maulana can explain how that process will happen.
So Allah will decree them to the will of Allah. This process will come. Sun and moon to join it.
And all of it will end. And where did it start? With water. And where did it end? With water. I make dua that Allah Ta'ala gives us a deep understanding and an appreciation for what water is. When He created the world, what He had willed to put into that water of benefit to us. But He also warns us that He can, in a blink of an eye, any moment, in a blink of an eye, He can destroy it. And we ask that Allah Ta'ala protect us in that regard. We also ask that Allah Ta'ala protect our country. There is not enough water. There will not be enough food. Our country will be very unstable. And it's up to people like us who know and who have a better understanding to share this and to do what is necessary to prevent Allah Ta'ala's wrath and to prevent our country from going into this form of destabilization. Because Allah Ta'ala had given us the warning before that. With those few words, you want me to talk a little bit more? Now let's carry on with the seed. Now the seed has germinated. When the seed germinates, one goes to the top, one goes to the bottom. The one that goes to the bottom goes with gravity. The one that goes to the top goes against gravity. What tells that leaf to go against gravity? Because it's pulled towards the sun. So it goes up and now it exposes itself to the sun. When the leaf exposes itself to the sun, what happens? Sunlight enters the leaf. Inside the leaf, you have something called chlorophyll. Now chlorophyll is very similar to salt water. It's just seawater. It's chlorophyll and you add magnesium to it. Then it's called chlorophyll. And this chlorophyll and the sunlight interacts, without me going into the chemistry of it, and it produces three things. The first thing it produces is water. That's where the water comes from. The second thing it produces is carbon dioxide, which plants give off. And the third thing it produces is energy. In other words, the energy that Allah Ta'ala put in the water, through this process of photosynthesis, the energy becomes available. And the plant consumes that energy to grow. Now the plant grows, and it begins to make more cells, and it absorbs more chlorophyll, and it takes more energy, and increases the number of cells, and it grows. And at some stage, the plant decides, I now need to make another plant. You know, like a young man who decides, I have to get married because I have to make another plant. And to do that, he beautifies himself. He makes a beautiful flower, a blossom. And that blossom will attract an animal. Key amongst the animals, chief amongst them, is the bee. And no wonder the Quran talks about the bee. In addition to this wonderful substance called honey that it makes, the bee is also an animal of vast intelligence. You know, bees, they can't talk to each other. Like ants, some animals can, and some animals can't. Bees don't talk to each other. They don't say, hey, 5 kilometers from here, there are some nice hibiscus blossoms, you can go and get some nectar. They can't do that. What they do is in a colony of bees, and from this we can learn how communities must be organized from the bees. Because in a beehive, some bees, every bee has got one job in its entire life, and it only does that one job. A bee lives no more than 30 days, 28 days. In its 28 days, it makes enough honey that you can put on the very, very tip of a teaspoon. That's all it makes. Entire life, a little bit of honey. Then some bees, they look after the hive, after the babies. They are the nannies. And they'll do that for their entire life. Some bees are the undertakers. They only remove the dead bees from the hive, take them away. For their entire life, they do that one job. The queen bee knows she only has to procreate. Nothing else. She never gives an instruction. This is the thing about leadership. True leadership comes when everyone in the community knows what is my job. I stick to it for the rest of my life. This is the great thing I admire about our teachers. They did one job for the rest of their life, only that job. Now, our Ustad used to sit in the class from morning to evening, not for 5 years, not for 10 years, not for 20 years, not for 30 years, I don't know, 50 years? Yeah. My father served the community of our town for 53 years. From the day he came from Durban till the day he died. And at the end of it, people say to him, Maulana, you're getting old, you're forgetting things. Why don't you must retire. He says, retirement. You don't retire from Allah Ta'ala's work. He used to shout at them. He said, do you want your money? One day they said to him, yeah, you're just hanging on for the money. He said, keep your money. And for a few years, he didn't even take a salary from them. Because the purpose is, do one job for the rest of your life in service of Allah. And the bees teach us that. Because if one bee starts getting other ideas and doing other things, he upsets the entire beehive. And then there are certain bees whose only job is to fetch the honey. And how they communicate, this is fabulous to watch. Because you can watch it inside the beehive. When a bee goes, you get bees who go, and exploratory bees. They go and find out where there's some nice honey, where there's some blossoms, and they don't take any honey. And they come back. When they come outside the hive, they begin to make a certain dance. Some of them, I don't know which dance is which distance. But for instance, when a bee dances in a circle, 360 degrees, the other bees know it's 2 kilometers away, in that direction of the sun. And his dance is inclined to the sun, so they know which direction to go and exactly what distance. Another bee comes and he dances half a circle. Then they know not 2 kilometers, 1 kilometer. A quarter of a circle. Some make an 8 or a 6. And each dance, as they move around, and they go bzzz. Have you seen a bee and it goes around like that, goes around like that? It seems like he's crazy. He's not. He's communicating with the other bees saying, listen, if you want nectar, you better go this distance in that inclination from the sun. So he comes to the nectar and he absorbs it into his stomach. And like the Quran tells us, in the stomach this thing is fermented, it is broken down, it is digested. And he comes to the hive. And then there are some bees who only build the comb, the honeycomb. Now the honeycomb, interesting about the honeycomb, it's a hexagon, 6 sides. The hexagon is the most sturdy, the strongest structure in nature. If you put things together, is a hexagon. water is in layers, and the water molecules are also arranged in hexagons, just like the bees. At a perfect each angle, 120 degrees, and they don't even have a protractor to measure it. They don't have a computer to measure 120 degrees. But you can go with the best computer in the world and it shows every angle in the hexagon is 120 degrees perfect. This is the design in nature. So they build these combs, and he goes to the comb and he deposits. He regurgitates, he vomits the honey, beautiful honey, into that comb. And then it must lie there so that it can mature a little bit before we can eat it. I can carry on like that, but I think I must stop here also. The wonders of nature, I ask that Allah Ta'ala inculcate in us an inquisitiveness about nature, the ability to think deeply about His creation and say, رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ مَن تُدْخِلِ النَّارَ فَقَدْ أَخْزَيْتَهُ وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ رَبَّنَا إِنَّنَا سَمِعْنَا مُنَادِيًا يُنَادِي لِلْإِيمَانِ أَنْ آمِنُوا بِرَبِّكُمْ فَآمَنَّا رَبَّنَا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين. Allah wants me to share something else with you from our discussion today. As a Muslim serving on this planning commission and talking about the future of this country and the various issues and the various challenges that faces us now, whether it's corruption, whether it is the politics, without going into the details, we have a tendency to be very judgmental to the extent of saying there's no future here. These people and this party and this and that is not going to take us into the future. Allah Ta'ala must prevent us from being too judgmental. We have to judge behavior that is wrong. But there's something, Allah Ta'ala did not bring us, our forefathers, from where they came from in the East. Here, my forefathers came, some from India, some from Indonesia, your forefathers as well. And they came to Africa not without purpose. Now there's something special about this continent, this part of the continent where we live. Nowhere in the world, and I've been to many countries, there's almost a place I haven't been. Nowhere in the world do you find this diversity of animals, plants, of weather, of people, of temperaments, and in my field, of soil, of water, of marine life, of fauna, flora, of birds, anything. Nowhere in the world do you find this diversity in one place like this. You can go anywhere in the world. Just the numbers, the thousands of species of fynbos we have in the Cape is more than any other country singularly has. And that's just the small little Cape. Not even talking about the various grasses. So Allah Ta'ala must have had a purpose to send us to this diversity of people as well. And I suspect it is to test whether in creation this diversity, will it destroy itself or will it find some form of harmony? Now, if we forget about nature for a moment, if we think about people, to connect a little bit to what Maulana Daya was saying in his lecture, the people of Africa. There are many hadith Maulana can share with us better than I can. But there's something about the people of Africa that we must recognize and appreciate. And I see it every day. I have many students who come from many places. African people of whom we've become part, we are just as African now. have a good-naturedness in them, to the extent that for all the atrocities that we, our people and Europeans, have committed in this country, they have not destroyed us. And they could have, and it has happened in many places. And we continue with a lot of that. But there's a good-naturedness that Allah Ta'ala had given them. And I see it in the way that they work with animals, in the way that they work with nature, in the way they do gardening. And I'm not racist about this. In fact, I think Allah Ta'ala had given them something special in their connection with people and their connection with nature. I think we have a lot to learn from them, from their forbearance, from their sabr, from their good-naturedness, from their connection with Allah Ta'ala's creation, almost innately, almost instinctively and telepathically. And I ask from my side, and also as a community, that we don't be so judgmental, that we learn from people that Allah Ta'ala has sent us to this part of the world, so we can learn from them and be with them and find harmony instead of destruction. Is that Mullah? Wassalamu ala al-mursaleen.
Jazakumullah khairan to Hafiz for this most valuable advice, valuable lessons that we have learned. Allah Ta'ala increase it, and inshallah may we benefit in the future as well. Allah Ta'ala reward Hafiz abundantly and use him in whichever positions he is as a conduit towards Islam, as an ambassador and representative towards the deen of Islam. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.